He's a partner at Reaper Esprit. He's worked as an investor in digital health and genomics. With his work before with Wellcome Trust, Atlas Venture, Radiant Capital, and he's on the board of several companies working in the space of digital health and genomics. So, hi, Vishal.
Hi, how are you?
Hi. Can you tell us a bit more about the companies you are involved with?
Sure. So as you mentioned, I invest in companies that are either in the area of precision or genomic medicine or in digital health. So most of my companies create value for patients using the data that they have. So I'm on the board of a company, very exciting business based in the UK called PushDoctor, which is now Europe's biggest telemedicine business, where you can actually see a doctor on a smartphone without having to wait. I'm on the board of a publicly listed company called Horizon Discovery, which is a leader in gene editing space and empowers people who are trying to build precision medicine drugs. I'm also on the board, which we did recently called ISO Digital Health, which is an online platform for people to get cognitive behavior therapy. As you might know, it takes a long time to find a therapist, sometimes several months. But ISO is one of the biggest digital providers in the UK, and they're able to offer therapy with a regulated therapist to people wherever they might be based. I'm also on the board of a company called LifeSum in Stockholm, which has a subscription-based app for healthy living, and that it is very popular around the world with millions of users. I also recently invested in a company in Berlin called Clue, which is a women's health product, which is a period tracking app, which tens of millions of women around the world use every month. So that is some sort of a rough idea of what I do and some of the companies that I'm currently involved with.
Okay. And so what motivates you to invest specifically in this field?
So I started my career as a physician, as a doctor. I've worked on the front line, and I think what really motivates me is to use new technology to make things better, both for physicians and also for patients. So most of my companies, and I started my investment career, most of my investments were in biotech. These were companies that were building drugs for unmet needs. And since about 2012, I have been more focusing on the data side of things. So to try and use data and connectivity to improve healthcare. So not just the drugs, not just the content which is made by pharma companies, but about how to get good quality healthcare to people wherever they happen to be.
Mm-hmm. Okay, already. So what would you say is the state of digital health precision medicine?
So I think from where I'm sitting, I see millions of people around the world using digital health technologies. So even in my portfolio, there are companies that are serving 10, 15, 20, 30 million users around the world. And if you look at actual medical care being given, if you look at PushDoctor, they serve thousands of patients every day. And so I think that there is a lot of progress that has happened in digital health, and we should recognize that. In precision medicine, things move a little bit slowly because there are significant regulatory hurdles. So it's not very easy to come up with at one end and say we will provide a different medicine to everyone with a different genomic type. But it takes I don't think the regulators are fully aligned with how it will get deployed. I also think that physicians are not fully aligned with how it will be deployed. What is really promising is that now we have millions of people who are getting their DNA sequenced. So genomic sequencing is growing exponentially. So very soon we will have tens of millions of users around the world, a complete DNA sequence, or at least the exome sequence. And that will catalyze more patients being identified for different conditions. And that is going to grow. I believe that the speed at which these technologies will grow is exponential. So even if we don't see much growth right now, the speed rate at which it will grow is going to be quite phenomenal.
Okay, yeah, but still, when you talk about speed, when do you think it will be a a thing, like in the matter of years, decades?
I think it will be a matter of years. I don't think it will be a matter of decades. I think that there is growing recognition now that there is additional knowledge in the DNA sequence of patients, both somatic DNA and as well as the tumor DNA. So it is very common for patients now to ask their physicians that should we be sequencing this, and soon. So right now these things are only offered in a few centers, and I think that standard of practice will grow, and particularly in oncology, where patients tend to be very much more motivated.
Okay, and so when these approaches actually become part of the standard procedures, what sort of impact do you think this will have on society?
I think the impact, what I'm seeing of the companies that I invest in and the companies that are in the sector where I am, one thing that is happening, and it's hard to tell whether it is the cause or the effect, it is a bit of both, I think, is that patients are taking a greater role in determining what kind of treatment they get. So until very recently, it was decisions of the providers or the payers of what treatment patients would get. Now, wherever there are options available, patients are very well aware. They search online, they are members of groups, and they participate in clinical trials, and they are becoming an important part of the discussion. And I think that's a very, very positive trend. To have patients becoming more aware of their condition, more aware of what options are available, and then actively choosing them is definitely a better world than what we have seen. In terms of how patients are accessing things, it is quite interesting to see millions of people who download LifeSum, which is this health app. They use it for several months. Some of them pay LifeSum a subscription, and then they manage their own healthcare in a way that is not really possible without having a digital companion. And some of them lose weight, some of them put on muscle, etc. So I think that the central piece of this revolution that we are going through of digital health is really about getting the patient and the user more central in the process of managing their healthcare.
Okay. Something I also wanted to ask you about is because usually with this topic, there's a lot of talk about ethical concerns, regarding patient data and such.
Yes.
Do you think this is a real concern?
Yes, I think that patient data is very important. Patient data is something people want it to be securely held. People do not want that data to be shared with people who may have some intentions which are not positive for the patient, and companies have to be careful about that. So the companies have to follow the regulation, have to understand their users, inform their users of how they use data, and most companies in the sector, I think, are quite good at doing that. So if you go and look at terms and conditions of Clue, for example, they're written in an English which is very different from what you would find, 20-page terms and conditions of Apple, for example,
Yeah.
because it is a much more emotive element of people's lives, and people want to do that. Once you are able to build that trust with the user, once the user knows that you are going to use their data well and you're not going to misuse their data, they're often quite open to sharing it. So I don't think that this is to be given that patients don't like to share data. In fact, patients are very keen to share data if they can see some benefit and if they have the trust in whoever is holding that data, that they will not abuse that relationship. And I think this should be a part of the debate about digital health, is about having a positive stewardship of data. And one thing which is most companies are aware in the sector, next year, middle of next year, the EU GDPR guidelines are coming into force. which changed the relationship and changed the level of obligation that companies have in how they store the data and how they share that data. And that will have standard for many companies, and most companies are getting ready to reach that higher standard. And I think that's a very positive development.
Okay, yeah, I mean, it's interesting because, like, as you mentioned before, you said that you feel sometimes like regulators are not fully there, like up to date with what's happening.
Yes.
So I guess, are there more initiatives like this that are starting to change the field?
Yes, so FDA has recently said that they are going to engage more with digital health companies because until recently they were not getting engaged in regulating digital health products, and now they are going to regulate software-based products, and they've already started to engage with a few companies that are going to have regulated platform. For example, Samsung and Apple are a part of that program where part of their software will be regulated, and then other people can build apps on that software and provide services.
Yeah, nice. But I mean, with these things, it's always complex. I was wondering what other challenges are currently there.
So one of the challenge, which is kind of something that entrepreneurs often come head to head with, is that the whole philosophy of digital products is that they are continuously improved. So every time new users will use the product gets better because you learn more about the users. And so every time you and I use Google, we make it better for the next user who's going to come and use it. Not really something that regulators like or have traditionally regulated in favor of. So for example, if you have a drug in a bottle, you have to share with the FDA the standard on which you have manufactured it, and you cannot change that standard because the FDA has said that this particular composition of the drug is approved, and any change in this composition means it will have to be regulated again. But that is completely the other end of what digital. So most of the value of digital products is about continuous improvement. And what regulators will have to find working with companies is a way by which we can regulate safety of these products, but not stop them from improving. And that's, I think, is going to be an interesting thing to watch out for over the next few years.
Okay, yeah. And but actually, something I also wanted to ask you, because like you're involved with companies that are both in the US and Europe, and I wanted to know if there are any major differences when trying to bring forward one of these companies in these areas, these locations.
I think the most significant difference that we have is that the way healthcare is provided in the US is very different from how it is provided in Europe. So most of these companies have to think slightly differently in how they will sell their product in the US and how they are going to find the payers, find a common ground with the payers of how the pricing of the product will be and how it will be delivered. And both have positive and negative sides. So from the outside, US appears to be a very large market and Europe looks like a small fragmented market. But when you go into the US, you realize that provider universe in the US is also very fragmented. So most providers will have access to 10 to 15 to 20 million users at maximum. So if you look at Kaiser Permanente, their whole database is about 16 million users. And that's not really that big if you compare that to, say the National Health Service in the UK. So I think that there are pros and cons, but products that are really able to show efficacy, which are really able to show that they improve outcomes for patients, they should be launched globally because that's how you should monetize that product.
Okay. So one thing before finishing that I wanted to ask you. So we've been talking a lot about like in general about the field, but I wanted to ask you like more of a personal question. Like, what application are you most excited about?
So I think it's hard for me to try and pick favorites in my portfolio. I think that would not be fair. But I do strongly believe that I feel gratified by helping companies that are addressing users that are currently underserved. So if you look at mental health, for example, patients around the world are really underserved. Only about 15 to 20% of people who are eligible or who will benefit from CBT get CBT in Europe or in the US. We would never accept something like that happening in cancer. We would never accept something like this happening in heart disease. But somehow we have accepted that in mental health conditions. And I feel that, digital health might have some role to play in trying to level that gap. So I find that very gratifying. I also find that the area of women's health globally is also underserved. So Clue's ability to educate women and help them manage their own reproductive life cycle is very, very helpful, especially in countries where they don't have sex education or they don't have access to healthcare in the same way as we may have in the Western world.
Yeah, those are some great applications. Hopefully, they will get there soon. We're running out of time, so thanks a lot, Vishal, for your time.
Thank you very much.